the report that was sent into it had several references to Tapirs, which is a symbol of anti-Mormonism on the internet.
Hi everyone, Nemo here. You've just heard C.D. Cunningham of Public Square magazine discussing the need for a civil rights group for members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Here's what he said when he was asked for an example of what such a group could do.
I think one space that a group like this could fill was it in 2019, I think, that there was the whistleblower. The Washington Post broke the story about the Ensign Peak Fund. And the report that was sent into it had several references to Tapirs, which is a symbol of anti-Mormonism on the internet. It's a little bit of a joke. They're making fun of Dan Peterson, who made an argument that might be what horses meant in the Book of Mormon translation, and they don't particularly care for that argument. And so Tapirs has become a little bit of an icon. And if you look at like the ex-Mormon subreddit, like that's literally the icon on there is a picture of a tapir. And so reading this as someone in the know who understands this Latter-day Saint space, I could immediately recognize this document as being motivated in part by anti-Mormon animus, right? The person who wrote this has this dog whistle about tapirs that people will hear who share their sentiments.
Now, a lot of people online have interpreted what he said as claiming that the tapir is a hate symbol. I don't personally hear that. And I think that claiming he said the tapir is a hate symbol is making slightly more of his remarks than what was perhaps intended. But then, I guess that depends on how hateful you think he is implying that anti-Mormonism is. Similarly, the fact that CD thought an LDS civil rights advocacy group should have spotted the mention of a tapir in the Ensign Peak whistleblower report, and seems to infer that somehow this undermines the credibility of that report, is making more of the tapir thing than is really there. But regardless, since the memes have started flowing, perhaps not surprisingly, people are now discussing whether the tapir is indeed a hate symbol or not. And so I thought I'd weigh in and give some background on how this humble odd-toed ungulate became the symbol of the ex-Mormon community, and also make it very clear that it is not a hate symbol. But first, a little pet hate of mine. See what I did there? As we're about to discuss, the tapir's involvement in Mormon apologetics relies on it being a South or Central American mammal. So quite why the ex-Mormon movement has chosen the one extant species of tapir not native to the Americas, the Malayan tapir, is beyond me. In fairness, it probably shouldn't irritate me as much as it does, but anyway, with that off my chest, let's get into it. Although building on the work of John L. Sorensen, the tapir debacle started in earnest with this man, Daniel C. Peterson, who said the following.
The suggestion that a tapir is referred to in the Book of Mormon by the word horse has been met with a lot of ridicule from a lot of people who, it strikes me, are actually fairly ignorant of anthropology and linguistics. It's very common for a group that moves into a new area, when they see a strange animal, to give it the name of an animal that's more familiar to them. I'll give you some examples. When the Romans first encountered elephants, they called them Lucabos, Lucanian cows, because for some reason they reminded Romans of cows. Now, an elephant obviously isn't a cow. When the Greeks went into Egypt, they encountered a really strange animal that they called a hippopotamus. What does a hippopotamus mean? It means a river horse. Hippopotami are not horses, but the Greeks called them horses. And still in German, the word for a hippopotamus is a Nilpferd, a Nile horse. So you look around and you see this very, very commonly. It's so common as to be uncontroversial. Seahorses are not horses. Prairie dogs are not dogs. Groundhogs are not hogs. This happens all the time. People see an animal, it reminds them of an animal they already knew, and they give it that animal's name. When the American Indians first encountered conquistador horses, they called them deer. And the tapir itself is very similar in a lot of ways to a small pony or something like that. It's often compared to a pony. In fact, one word that was common in Mexico about 60 years ago for the tapir was the anteburro, a former burro that had been a burro before and had now become a tapir. So you hear people ridiculing that on the grounds that they're too small and so on and so forth. They're talking about familiar tapirs they've maybe seen. But the Baird's tapir grows to be about 700 pounds. It's about the size of a donkey. And it's not at all inconceivable that somebody looking at that didn't know what it was, might call it a horse.
Now, there are two simple reasons why he's wrong. The first is that tapirs are native to Central and South America. Joseph Smith and most of his contemporaries believe that the events of the Book of Mormon occurred in North America. Early brethren locate Cumorah in western New York. It must be conceded that this description fits perfectly the land of Cumorah in New York, as it has been known since the visitation of Moroni to the prophet Joseph Smith, for the hill is in the proximity of the Great Lakes and also in the land of many rivers and fountains. Moreover, the prophet Joseph Smith himself is on record definitely declaring the present hill called Cumorah to be the exact hill spoken of in the Book of Mormon. Further, the fact that all of his associates from the beginning down have spoken of it as the identical hill where Mormon and Moroni hid the records must carry some weight. It is difficult for a reasonable person to believe that such men as Oliver Cowdery, Brigham Young, Parley P. Pratt, Orson Pratt, David Whitmer, and many others could speak frequently of the spot where the prophet Joseph Smith obtained the plates as the hill Cumorah and not be corrected by the prophet, if that were not the fact. That they did speak of this hill in the days of the prophet in this definite manner is an established record of history. The second is the idea of the lone shift. In and of itself, it isn't particularly problematic to postulate that the Nephites, upon discovering the unfamiliar tapir, decided to call it a horse, because tapirs reminded them in some way of the horses of their native Arabian Peninsula, which they neglected to bring with them on their sea voyage. That is, of course, leaving Curoloms and Cumoms at the door, because the Nephites had no trouble finding new and novel names for whatever on earth those things are. The issue fundamentally is with what horses are described as doing in the Book of Mormon, pulling chariots and going to war. The war usage of horses is mainly portrayed by approved church artwork, and the extent to which approved church artwork depicts accurate historical events and offers insights into the Book of Mormon is a story for another time. But essentially, this guy becomes this guy. Entirely implausible and frankly laughable. It is, I would argue, one of Mormon apologetics' weakest points outside of the Book of Abraham. Okay, but it's a silly argument. Why is that a big deal? Well, imagine this. You've spent your entire life believing the LDS faith. Not just a belief, it is the way the world is. It's your way of life. It's your community. Then, often amongst other troubling information, you're presented with the cold hard fact that despite their appearance in the Book of Mormon, horses went extinct in pre-Columbian America 10,000 years ago, which as a side note is probably wreaking havoc with your conception of the Earth as 6,000 years old. In your attempt to try and resolve this issue, you come across a man who tells you that when the Book of Mormon says horse, it actually means this. At best, it's a very weak attempt to make something problematic make sense. At its worst, it seems like a lazy argument, sometimes perceived as an insult to the intelligence of the person that it is trying to persuade, because it is just such a ludicrous proposition. Those who have left the faith have taken the tapir as their symbol because it reminds them of the weakness of the apologetic arguments offered in order to get them to stay. But is it hateful? No. It doesn't mock anything held sacred by members of the church, like the founder Joseph Smith or sacred temple ceremonies. It doesn't attack an individual or a group of individuals. Rather, it holds in jest the often silly lengths to which apologetic arguments can go in trying to defend the indefensible. It is a celebration of no longer having to try and make sense of the senseless. It represents an approach to reasoning that ex-Mormons now reject. It's an outward reminder of an inner commitment to never perform such farcical mental gymnastics again. And most importantly, they are really cute. And I sell t-shirts with them on.